Music theory in the context of house music is kind of an interesting thing because you can follow many conventional music theory rules, but you can also completely ignore them and do your own thing. Sometimes it's kind of nice to meet in the middle and combine best of both worlds. So let's take a look at how we can do that in this video. One of the common, almost traditional techniques in house music is obviously to sample something like a chord and then pitch it around. And in my prior video on music theory, we've already taken a look at this example, a track called True Force by SE62, and it pitches this chord sound around, right? And the chord in there is actually quite simple. So you just have this minor triad, so in this case starting from a G sharp, and you just throw an octave on top. If we now use a chord tool to just be able to play this chord on every key that I'm hitting, obviously the sample has some processing, it's more like a stab sample, but the theory or the chord behind it is quite simple. They even go for this again in a later part of the track. So this chord isn't that complicated either. You basically have a C sharp minor 7, but then you're playing an inversion of that. So you're bringing up the E up here and then doubling the octave. Throw that in a chord tool. So you're also pitching that around on the chord, and it's really a good technique because you can use it to make many cool sounds. In one of my videos about garage and old school house, I made a slightly more complex version of something like that, but it's not that complex either. Let's take a quick listen. Just get happy. Just get happy. Just get... So in here, I also used the chord tool on a pretty simple sound, which is just creating like a minor 9 chord. So we're using a minor 9 through the board, but we're just playing a slightly more complex riff. So we're starting with a G minor 9, C minor 9, D minor 9, and doing these octave jumps. In context. Just get on your feet. Just get. Makes you feel real good. Of course, you can create some great music with this approach, and that's why it's an absolute house classic. But it also quickly runs into some limits and really kind of breaks the rules of traditional music theory. And here's why. If we quickly take a look at a typical diatonic scale like C major, so you're starting on the 1, which is your C, you will have a major chord. On a 2, you will have a minor chord, D minor. On a 3, you also have a minor chord, E minor. 4 is major, G is major, 6 is minor, 7 is diminished. So a scale is made of different types of chords. And if you just pitch one chord around, you're very quickly leaving what would be considered like normal music theory and normal chord progressions, because you're just very limited to the specific chord you're sampling. And I mean, you can sample 7th chords and 9th chords and this type of stuff, but if you're working with one sample, it will always be the same type of chord. Another reason why like pitching one chord around kind of limits you is because you would usually use some chord inversions. For example, let's start with a C minor 7, jump into a G minor 7, and afterwards an F minor 7. Instead of jumping from the C all the way up to the G, we can play an inversion of the C. So we're bringing up the C and the D sharp and play them up here. So we can now jump from the C minor 7 to the G minor 7 and to the F minor 7. If you're just sampling one chord and jumping around, it will create a certain aesthetic. You will leave your normal scales in a way, and you cannot do any inversions because the sample is already fixed, right? So in two type of ways, you're kind of moving away from your conventional chord progressions. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing, and we might even be able to combine it in a way and get best of both worlds. So like a style that is similar to what you know from house music and chords being pitched around, but then in order to round things up, kind of use a different chord. And this brings us to our final example, which we're going to take a look at. That's a pretty cool housey progression. Let's break it down and start with our right hand. So in the right hand, we're kind of doing something similar to pitching a chord around. We're starting with an E minor 7, jumping into a D minor 7, making a big jump up to a G minor 7. So for now, we're just using minor 7th chords and we're making big jumps, almost like we're sampling a chord. But on the last chord, to kind of round things up and have one in there which isn't the same, we're just jumping from a G minor 7 to a G major 7. And that's something that's also quite common in house music, is kind of switching between minor and major 7th chords or 9th chords. It's something that doesn't necessarily follow a typical music theory, but it's something that you can just use to kind of create chord progressions that sound and seem housey and are kind of loopy, but they're not limited by using just one sample. So let's listen to that progression kind of in a loop. Something that you can also do to kind of step up your music theory game is, instead of just thinking in some chords in the right hand and then making a bass line separately, is to kind of consider your music in a way where your song has certain chords and the bass line is part of those chords. So in our progression in the right hand, we played the E minor 7. Let's add this E in the bass also. So we're just playing E minor 7. But now when we're going into the D minor 7 in our right hand, we can jump up to a G in the bass. So, and this creates kind of a cool sound. I don't know exactly what to call this chord. It could be an F over G, kind of a sus sound, which has the D in here. I think you could also call it like a something 6 chord with a 9 in there. But let me know in the comments if you know exactly what this chord is. But what I know about this chord is that it comes from like this cliche soli vibes, or it's used there where you're resolving from a sus chord like this, like an F over G, into a C major. That's like a typical finish in certain soul sounds. In this case, we're just kind of using this chord in a line of chords which theory-wise might not make crazy sense, but kind of work out well anyway. So we had our E, jumping into a F over G. Now in the right hand, we were jumping up into a G minor 7, right? On the bottom in the bass, let's actually go to a D sharp. Which, if you bring it up an octave, you will see it's just a D sharp major 9. So our progression up until this point, E minor 7, F over G, D sharp major 9. And then lastly, we had the switch, right? From where in the right hand, we have the G minor 7, jumping into a G major 7. But in the bass, we're actually going to use this leading tone to go back to our 1 and play in E. So this is the progression in full. So this switch, like moving up a half tone, but switching from a major 9 to a minor 9, is also something that you will often find in house music. So that's kind of cool. Once more, the progression in full. So let's actually bring up the bass for a second. It's a lately bass. So what we now had in the bass is, I mean, we're starting on an E minor 7. So you might think you are in a minor scale, but it's completely fair and cool, not only in house music, also in other genres, to like borrow from other scales or other modes. So you don't have to be too stuck on the theory. In this case, if you were in a minor scale, the bass line would sound like this. Because you have the minor 7 in a minor scale. But this sounds a bit cooler. Like it has a certain style to it, right? So you can use this major 7 in here, even though you're starting on a minor 7. So we had our chords, right? Whenever a chord is playing, in the bass line, you can jump on almost every note of the chord that you're currently playing. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, so I'm going to be a bit quick. But what the bass line can do to spice things up a little bit is, in context, all right, I hope you found this helpful. Next up, we're going to actually look at the production of this track. So this was just like a warm-up to kind of go over the chords, so I don't have to do that in the next video. If anything was unclear or a bit too fast, feel free to let me know in the comments. I usually reply any questions. I know some of the stuff is kind of difficult and quick, and also kind of difficult to explain at some points. But yeah, I hope you found some of this stuff useful, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next one. Peace.